Gabriel, you mentioned ideologues. Are one of these ideologues Ibrahim Patel? Because it seems the more I read about him, the more it seems like he has a massive influence over the South African cabinet. I think Tony Leon mentioned in his recent book that he and Tito Mboweni clashed frequently, and that he's oftentimes overrided Tito Mboweni's decisions. And it seems like he's a member of the World Economic Forum, that shadowy organization everyone likes to talk about. So, who is this guy?
That he's the minister against trade and industry or something like that. I really, it's amazing when Ramaphosa was in full bloom. I remember having difficult conversations with people in big business whom we consult and give advice sometimes, because I had been a Ramaphosa fan, but as soon as he started making his policy recommendations, in his first Sona address the day after he was sworn in, he said we have to go through with expropriation without compensation. I was like, guys, we've got to be skeptical here. This is not good news. But I spoke to a lot of corporate, C-suite executives who said, "Nah, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. He's on us. He's like, he understands what South Africa needs." Even those Ramaphoriacs, if you gave them half a chance, would go off about Patel. And I think it's because the closer you are to actually confronting the balance sheets of the businesses that still employ most South Africans, the more clearly you see the direct and pernicious ways in which Patel's agenda has had an effect. It really is quite it's quite frustrating. I think to his credit, he has a smooth demeanor and he's quite eloquent. And he's got a quiet confidence. I think he's also probably, quite honest in the way I was describing Praveen Gordhan. I don't know that he's personally quite as spotless, but I think he's relatively close. But he's been a difficult customer. I will say that Patel was making pretty flagrant proposals for prescribed assets, which means taking the pension pot. South Africa, by the way, has one of the largest pension pots in the world, partly because of how negative investment conditions have been. People really want to keep their money in the safest place they can keep it. And so those trillions of rands, Patel said, well, the government should just tell the asset managers to pour that into state-owned enterprises because that's like the social thing to do. Regardless of whether those state-owned enterprises are still stealing money. The immediate comeback argument is, if it's such a good idea, why aren't people doing it without a gun being forced to their head? Anyway, I remember that issue quite clearly around 2018 when Patel was making speeches, DTI and so on. And we're sort of arguing for the case for socially minded prescribed infrastructure investment through a prescription mechanism. Because I went and I wrote a piece in Business Day, and I did a couple of interviews on ENCA and SABC, where I said what Patel is pushing is basically trying to kick Gogo in the teeth and see if you can find a gold filling in there to pay for the revolution. And at the time, it seemed kind of, I don't know, some people said, nah, you're being alarmist. They're not really trying for that. But as the criticism against it heated up, the language stopped being so vague and it became more clear about exactly what was being demanded and required. And the IRR campaigns team, I wasn't involved with it directly at the time, kicked into gear pushing against it. And it was quite an interesting tussle, specifically with Patel. And the upshot of it was eventually a capitulation, where as hard as he tried, he didn't get what he wanted. And the idea of prescribed assets was put away. And really what it took was getting ordinary South Africans to switch on, to activate, to complain, and specifically to get customers of major asset managers and pension fund people who actually hold pensions, to complain to the people who are nominally supposed to be guarding their wealth and get them to send it up the chain until a few of the CEOs eventually turned. They all started out saying, oh, no, maybe it's fine. It's probably a good idea. A little bit like with NHI. Some say it's good, some say it's bad, but it's a bit confusing. And it takes a lot of energy to activate people to complain so that the I don't want to swear, the S floats uphill instead of downhill. The irritation floats uphill instead of downhill, all the way to the CEO, and then he converts it to the minister. And then the minister is forced to back down. And that is, I claim that as a major victory for the IRR and others. There were lots of others working with us. But that was a big one for the IRR. And I've got a few on the other side of this wall. I've got a few newspaper posters framed to celebrate it, because it's an example where even a hardened ideologue like Patel can be blocked from getting his way if ordinary citizens stand up and just use common sense.
Do you think the Communist Party knows and realizes the power of that ministry? Because before him, it was Rob Davis, who I've interviewed on WorldView, that was the Minister of Trade and Industry. Do you think they know that the power of that position? That's why they always advocate that a communist takes that role.
I would I would say yes. I would say yes, they know it very well. And in a way, I feel like it's our job at the IRR to try and help South Africans realize the same thing. The ability for someone in that position to make relatively marginal changes that have knock-on effects that really end up hitting your bill at the grocery store, at the hardware store, at the the scrap metal store, at the second-hand car store, wherever it may be, but also at the point of salary receipt. It's profound. It is somewhat invisible to the untrained eye, and I think that there's a nice old doctrine of the invisible cost and the very tangible concentrated reward. People like Milton Friedman like to talk about this, right? Where they said the cleverest trick that you can play as a government official is to steal an invisible amount from lots and lots of people and then concentrate it in the hands of a few people. So if you're stealing R2 off of everyone's grocery bill, they can't really see it, right? You've just changed some rule that makes it impossible. Yeah, okay, it costs R2 more to buy shampoo than it used to. You don't really notice it, but all of those R2 can be gathered up and concentrated in the hands of a few with great benefit. That's sort of traditionally the model of a developmental state that has been captured. That's the model of what a trade and industry minister is going to do if they have the power to do it and the interest in doing it. And I think that it's the basic tenet of the Communist Party that you want the government to be running everything. And that requires a great amount of resources. So how are you going to get those resources? Well, you take a little bit, concentrate it, then you've got what you need to achieve the revolution. And hey, if you don't achieve the revolution, you can sit back and sip champagne and feel good about yourself in the meanwhile. So either you get the hardcore socialists or the champagne socialists, but either way, that model of taking a little bit from a lot of people and therefore putting a lot in the hands of a few, that ends up being a really timeless way of achieving state capture.